I'm Bob Wernle, member of the Oral History Committee of the Montgomery County Historical Society. This is the 16th of September, 1999, and we're here at Lane Place making doing another one of our interviews with a local citizen who was involved in World War II. I'll introduce him. First of all, let me say that the cameraman today is Mike Hall, who is the executive director of the Montgomery County Historical Society. And our guest today is Norman Dillman. Now, Norm, give us your date of birth.
I was born September the 30th, 1914, in the town of Waveland, Montgomery County.
Norm, I didn't realize you and I were born the same year. We were old. In fact, you were a little bit older than I was, about 3 months older than I was.
Yeah.
And who were your parents?
My parents was Gary L. Dillman and Mabel Lowe Dillman. They were both born in Montgomery County and lived in Waveland most of their life until they came to Crawfordsville in 1935.
They were in the farm implement business, weren't they? Or what?
Yes. My grandfather, George Dillman, and my father started in the John Deere implement business and the international harvester business, both combined in 1925. Then we had the farm depression, and International Harvester foreclosed on one of our prominent farmers down around Waveland on a tractor that we had sold him, and he took out an international note, an International Harvester note, to pay for a tractor, and they, without notifying my grandfather or my father, went out and repossessed this tractor. It left an awful sour feeling in both my grandfather and my father's mouth, and they proceeded to rake the money together, pay off the note that the man had signed, went and got the tractor, and took the International Harvester contract back into Indianapolis, and that was the last of our experiences with International Harvester. From then on, it was John Deere Green all the way. We moved here with the implement business in 1946 when I came back from the service. My father had built a new building, and
that was down on South Washington, wasn't it?
That's right, down by the old jail.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
what's in there now? Is there anything in there?
That building is empty now.
That's that yellow tile.
We called it Brazil block, the yellow tile building. And in 1964, we had our farm depression. And farm machinery had gone so high, prices had gone so low as far as farm commodities and products.
You sold out. Did you
Yes,
sell it?
I sold out.
Okay.
I sold out to the Montgomery County Implement Company.
Well, now, Norm, what was your what descent, what nationality were your parents? Do you know?
My mother was a direct descendant of and belonged to the American Revolution.
Yeah, the Daughters of the
American Revolution. My father and grandfather lived in the southern part of the state until they lived at Ellettsville until I think around 1890.
Mm-hmm.
That particular year, my grandfather started the hardware business in Waveland.
Mm-hmm.
He came to Waveland with a one-horse wagon, his tinner's equipment, and a new bride
Mm-hmm.
from the southern part of the state. He established the Dillman hardware and the Dillman livery barns, and was also a part of a group that got together and bought the area where the Shades is today,
Uh-huh.
and it was known as the Garland Dales Mineral
Right.
Springs Association.
Your grandparents were.
Yes, and they also had a summer home at just down Sugar Creek from there, they called Pleasant View.
Uh-huh.
And there was quite a number of the local citizens had summer cottages there.
Uh-huh. I don't know where
That
would that be from Jim Davis Bridge?
Well, that's down the creek about 10 miles from Jim Davis Bridge. It's right on the Montgomery County and Fountain County and Park County line.
Uh-huh.
There, they all three, it's an area that was home of most of the clovers that you have heard of in northwestern Montgomery County.
Okay, now let's get started on your own background. You were born down there in Waveland.
That's right.
And where did you go to high school?
I went to Waveland High School. I graduated out of Waveland High School in 1932.
And what did you do after that?
I went to work after that for the Farm Bureau in the elevator at Browns Valley, Indiana.
Okay.
And
Not there anymore.
no, it's
Long since gone.
long since gone.
What did you do? What was your job at the elevator? Just
Well, I hauled
shoveling grain?
Hauled grain, that's right.
Okay. And what were there any of the people around Crawfordsville now that were in high school with you?
Yes, a Mrs. Sue Pruitt was a classmate of mine. A Robert Fulwider, he lives in Waveland today, was a classmate of mine. Also, my fine wife was a classmate of mine.
Oh, she was.
Oh yes, we graduated the same, went to school the same.
You're speaking of Ruby?
I'm speaking of Ruby.
Okay. All right, now, you know, I read in the paper this morning that Roosevelt signed the draft today, about 1940. Remember any, you have recollection of registering for the draft?
No, I didn't register for the draft.
Didn't you? Well,
No, I was already in the service.
Oh, were
Oh,
you?
wait a minute.
No, you wouldn't.
No, I wasn't. No, I did register for the draft. I went into the service after that, before
Yeah.
I was called.
And where'd you register? Up here in
Up here in Crawfordsville.
Walter Spencer was.
Yes, Walter Spencer and I forget who else was at that time.
All right, now start out by telling us what was your first. Where'd you report in, and how'd you happen to enlist?
Well, this is kind of an embarrassing situation, but I was engaged in a very poor marriage. And I won't speak about that anymore, but with the situations as they were, I decided that I would enlist in the Marine Corps. And
you were already married?
Oh yes, I was married. I was married when I worked in the Browns Valley elevator. So times was rough back then, Bob. And I enlisted in the Marine Corps. And
did you have any children by that marriage?
No. I have, my only child is an adopted child.
Okay.
During my second marriage.
Okay. Now go on.
All right. I reported in Indianapolis to the Marine Corps station there. We were put aboard a train and sent to San Diego, where we were to do our boot camp training. We went through the boot camp there in San Diego. After that, I was assigned as a rifle instructor on the firing range at Camp Elliott, which is just a short ways.
You must have been a pretty good shot.
Well, I didn't bring my expert rifleman badge along with me, but I wear the expert rifleman all the time during the Marine Corps, and it's always on my uniform today.
Listen, I was an expert too.
Was you?
Yeah.
Good.
In the Army.
Well, I shot.
I got that at Fort Benning.
Yeah. I shot expert along with Gunny Sergeant Tom Hall and 2 or 3 other renowned Marines, and was an expert rifle instructor at Camp Elliott. And then came the mutterings of the Japanese, and
okay, you're starting to talk about the mutterings of the Japanese. What's the date here that we're talking about?
We're talking about somewhere, I can't remember exactly the date, but we're talking somewhere about the 1941.
Well, late 41 or before Pearl Harbor?
Before Pearl Harbor, yes.
Okay.
And the 2nd Division was at this time just being formed. And the 6th Marine Regiment was in, at that time, Iceland. And they were brought around to San Diego. The 2nd Marine Regiment was formed at San Diego. assembled in Camp Pendleton. We were, at that time, in the rifle range at Camp Elliott, and were considered part of the 2nd Marine Division. We were not thoroughly organized. We were not up to strength at that time. I spent about 5 months at Camp Elliott, and the whispers of the Japanese going into China and so on and so forth, and possibility of war kept looming. And at that time, we were sent out to Hawaii. Our ship was sent to Hawaii, and we had no idea of what we were being assigned to or anything when we left. So we went to Hawaii. 2 days before we got there, December the 7th, Pearl Harbor happened.
2 days before you got to Hawaii?
That's right. We were 2 days out of Hawaii, and
you were out on the ocean.
We were on the ocean, that is right.
How'd you, tell us about it. How, did it come over the radio and you were,
it came over the radio.
On that ship?
It came over the radio that Pearl Harbor was being bombed on a Sunday morning, and of course the Navy was in charge of our shipping and so on, and we heard no orders or anything at that time. It was all strictly a naval affair. We were sent in then to Hawaii and landed at I can't think of the name of the place that we landed, but we were sent to the north shores of the Big Island of Hawaii because they thought the Japanese would invade. The very first thoughts of all was the Japanese would definitely invade the Hawaiian Islands. Well, we were put on guard up from the situation around what they call the blowhole. It's a part of the northern shores of Hawaii. And we established a camp at what is known as the Parker Ranch of Hawaii today. And we...
Norm, let me interrupt here. You came across, what kind of a ship were you on?
We were on one of the Matson liners.
Oh, you were on
at that time.
One of the good ones.
Yes, it was an ideal trip.
Are those? I think maybe those ships are still.
There. See, the Matson line was took over by the Marine Corps as transports for them right at the
There
start.
was 2 of them, weren't there?
I think there was 4.
Were there? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We arrived in Hawaii, as I said, and started doing guard duty there. Nobody knew what anybody else was doing. There was not too much of a command set up at that time, and we, just being Green servicemen, was all scared to death. We knew that there was going to be an invasion, or thought there was, and we didn't know what to do about it. Well, at that time, we had a man come forward who was not one of the top ranks in the Marine Corps, but a man by the name of Chesty Puller.
Fuller, yeah.
One of the old established Marines and one of the greatest Marines that ever heard taps. And he took over and set up the guards on the north side of the island. In the meantime,
he was a Marine, though.
You bet your boots he was a Marine. Don't ever think he was anything else.
Did you ever get to see him? Or?
Oh, yes. Yes.
What kind of personality was he?
A man that I admired very much because he was about my size. Oh. His shoulders were about as wide as mine. And he carried a little quirt, which at that time most of the officers carried, and his habit was to slap his leggings and boots when he wanted an order done. And when Chesty slapped his boots, you did it. No questions asked.
Had they started convoys at that time coming over? Were there convoys?
No, they hadn't been started convoys yet. The convoys more or less started with the war with Germany and that particular war. Now we ran in convoys after that. After Guadalcanal, most of all the moving of transport and troops was done by convoy. But until then, no.
All right, well, what was life like then on Hawaii? You didn't stay there long, I suppose.
Life was wonderful on Hawaii at that time. The Hawaiians knew that we were there to protect them, and they had been pretty, well, they were just bumfuzzled when Pearl Harbor happened. It was strictly a surprise, even though I think that our government at that time knew it was going to happen in a period of 6 months.
Did you see any of the devastation?
Oh yes, yes. I saw the whole devastation. I saw where the Nevada was sunk, and let's see, I think it was in Nevada. I get my stories mixed up there. There was the Nevada, the Utah, and of course other ships, but not battleships, were sunk there. And we were so we could go down there, and we did. We shipped out of Pearl Harbor when we actually shipped out to head for Tulagi.
How long were they there at Hawaii?
We were there in Hawaii about 5 months. And we took a lot of our training there. In fact, practically all of our combat training was done in Hawaii. And then, like I say, the war was declared on December the 7th. I think no, am I right? Yeah, December the 7th.
December 7th.
And not too long after that, the 1st Division, which was really at that time the only well-organized division, took off for combat, but they didn't know where they were going.
That was not your outfit.
No, that was not my outfit.
Yeah.
They wound up and invaded Guadalcanal, a small island in the Solomons group that the Japanese were planning to make an airport, just literally a floating airport. And they had well started. They had bulldozed off Henderson Field and one other strip they were starting on. And it was their plans to invade Australia and New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And Guadalcanal would have been their main southern air base. The 1st Marine Division made theirself well known with very few men and very little experience in Guadalcanal in a very short time. But there was another island, Tulagi, that was out approximately 70 miles from Guadalcanal in the place where we landed. It was closer to Guadalcanal than other points. And we were sent there later, after Guadalcanal was practically secured. We were to eliminate the Japs on Tulagi. And that was where my first combat started. We had some pretty bloody fights there.
Well, now, okay, you had your training, but then where'd you first land, and describe what you say you're starting bloody fights. Did you land on Tulagi was the island
Tulagi was the island. Here is, part of our outfit went to Guadalcanal.
Mm-hmm.
The 6th Marine Regiment, you have to remember this, Bob, that the Marine Corps was a very small unit that I'm talking about now, at this area. We thought of regiments more than we did divisions.
Yeah.
Our 2nd Division was composed of the 2nd Marine Regiment, the 4th Marine Regiment, and the 6th, no, wait a minute, pardon me. It was the 6th Marine Regiment and the 8th Marine Regiment. And we were split up some. Now, here is the 2nd Division on Guadalcanal. This shows your picture here. And I think you'll find some other.
What was were you still a private?
No, at that time I was private first class.
Okay.
We had 2 privates, private first class and private.
Now tell us about did you hit the beach, or how'd you come in?
We hit the beach. At that time we didn't have any assault boats or assault tanks or anything like that to get in the beach. We literally hit the beach with assault boats, Higgins boats they called them.
Okay.
They had a high prow on the front of them, and the Navy was in charge of them. They took us in to as far as the boat would go.
Uh-huh.
Squads were sent in there. It consisted of a leader, perhaps in some cases 2 leaders, and about 15, 16 men. And they went as far towards the beach as they could, and when they hit bottom, why, you got out and waded in from there.
Did the front go down?
Yes, the front went down. That's right.
You waded in, okay?
That's right. That's right. We waded in.
Were there Japanese up there shooting at you?
Yes.
Okay. Were guys falling around you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
About how many men were in your outfit that went in at that time?
That went into that time, there was, I think, if I remember right, around 1,600 of us. That included.
So there've been a good many Higgins boats lined up along the shore.
That's right. That is right. And they got back out of there as quick as they could, just as quick as they possibly
You
can.
mean the Higgins boats that pull back
Now,
and leave you fellas running in?
that's right. That's
Okay.
right. They went back after more.
Tell us, you got a rifle in your hand, are you holding it over your head to keep it?
Keep it dry.
Okay. Are you shooting at the same time, or trying to?
Well, if you saw anything to shoot at, you were shooting at that time. But mostly, you were trying to get into the shore because practically all of the islands in the Southwest Pacific had what they call seawalls built around them.
Mm-hmm.
Your first line of safety that you could see when you started in was this coconut palm log, one on top of the other, and braced. That was a seawall. And
who put those there?
the Japanese put
Okay.
them there, or the inhabitants before the Japanese took over the island. But that was your first line of defense if you could get behind that seawall, with the exception of mortars and hand grenades. That's about all that the Japs could get in the way of killing you or defending themselves. So that it was mostly a run for the seawall. Now I have pictures here in my book.
How do you get over the seawall?
All right, there comes your Marine Corps, Bob.
Okay.
I'm glad you asked that question. A sergeant, mostly, or a lieutenant, in most cases, would stand up and he'd say, "Follow me." That was the only order that was given. As you will notice here, that is the saying and the words yet.
Follow me.
Follow me.
Okay.
That's all it took. And anybody that didn't follow him, he was mostly counted as a casualty. That's the way we run. And I don't know, I never seen a man not following.
How'd you get, okay, you're running up against this wall. How do you get over that wall?
The wall is only 6 or 7 feet tall, and you just literally found a way to get over it. Either
There were logs, were they?
they were coconut logs, yes, and you could climb them. They was spaces in holes in the logs and cracks in the logs and so on and so forth that you could get over that. Or in many places there was openings that you could go through. However, the Japs had mostly machine guns lined up on those holes that you can get through, so you naturally took another way.
What does it feel like to have those machine guns rattling off at you?
That's a funny question, Bob, but a good question. But when a man is in close combat as that, he forgets practically his own safety, a certain thing takes over his mind. He worries about the man on each side of him and his unit as a whole. But I would say there's a thing that the common man does not even understand, and I don't today, what takes over in a man's brain when he arises to the call of follow me.
Mm-hmm.
I can't answer your question there.
Do you remember the fellows on your right or the left? Do you remember you said you were thinking about the fellows beside you?
Yes, you bet I remember.
Remember.
One of my very best friends was to the right of me. He stayed with me all the way through the service. I shook hands with him when we got out of the service in Chicago at the North Shore, where I was given my papers there, and he got his papers. We both lived through it. But I remember well the first night we spent there. Al Franczak from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was a Polish lad. He had at one time had in his mind to be a priest in the Catholic Church, Catholic religion. Well, he was wearing his rosary beads the first night that we spent on that island. And I asked him, Al, if there's any way that you can count me in on them, you kind of do that. Al called me about 2 weeks ago. We're still the very best of friends. We go to Marine Corps reunions all over the United States, and we sit together, drink our beer together, and talk old times together. I might say that some of the rest of my friends didn't fare so well.
Okay. He was with you as you went over that wall?
That's right. He went over the wall with me, and I might say right now, he walked down the plank with me, or up the plank with me, to go in to the ship when we came back from Sasebo, Japan, 5 years later.
Well, let's get over the wall and what happened after that.
Well, the Japs were not too plentiful on that particular island, Tulagi. We soon took the island and was there, I guess, about 3 months to get things straightened out. The Air Force was coming in. They were building as many fields as they possibly could at that time. But you must remember that the Navy just kind of forgot about the Coral Sea and so on and so forth. And the Japs found this out through reports that were being sent from ship to ship, ship to shore. They could read our Morse code and so on just as well as we could. They were watching for every move we made. Consequently, when our first supplies started to come in to the Coral Sea, the Japs were there and waiting for them.
Well, now, what, the Coral Sea, you're talking about the aircraft carrier?
No, I'm talking about the
Okay.
the aircraft carrier was named after the
That's what I
Coral
meant.
Sea.
I know.
Uh-huh. No, the Coral Sea was offshore from Guadalcanal and up through that area. There was a narrow strip from between islands that formed what they call the Coral Sea. And any supplies that came down to Guadalcanal, to Tulagi, and Florida Island, and different ones that were occupied, had to come through that area. Well, at that time, the Navy was just so overtaxed, they had practically all of their ships in the Atlantic taken and shipping and so on and so forth towards the English route and with the German war, the war with the Axis, we'll say that. At that time, MacArthur had been shelled out and evacuated from the Philippines.
Yeah.
I'll have to say that I'll be sorry. You won't find no good words from me about MacArthur. The Marine Corps always had a song that they sent for MacArthur to come to Tulagi, but General McCarthy said no. They asked him the reason. He said, it's not the season. Besides, they don't have no UNCO.
Any what?
Well, USO.
Oh.
We called it the UNCO. It was just a laughter among Marines, and you will find that no Marine thought too much of MacArthur. He never backed him up. After that, we came to, after we left Tulagi, we went to
Well, now,
the greatest.
what was Tulagi like? Was that a inhabited island, or did
Yes,
you see natives?
it was a native island that had been owned by Spain, I think. Now, I think I'm right on this. It was owned by Spain. Then it was owned by Germany, and it was taken from Germany during World War I, or after World War I, and the English took over a lot of the islands in that area as some kind of the peace treaty.
Protectorate.
As protectorates. That's right. And then we were sent to what all Marines from Tulagi was the heaven on earth, and that was New Zealand. We was sent there. The New Zealanders were the most pleasant people that I know of, that I ever met. They accepted us with just open arms, and we were set up in a town, not too large a town, Christchurch in New Zealand.
That was the southern, the other.
That's right.
No.
And we done a lot of training there.
How long were you on Tulagi?
We were on Tulagi about 6 months. And
Did you set up camps there?
yes, well,
Or how did you live?
well, you lived by your pup tent, which was our shelter half, which you want to call it. You had a shelter half that was a thin tarpaulin that you wrapped around your blanket
Yeah.
and tied it over your pack. It was only half of a tent.
And you had a buddy who had...
You had a buddy who had the other half. And I might tell you this, that the shelter half was just a place to hide. It wasn't necessarily waterproof or anything else. You tried to get your blanket up out of the water by putting maybe logs or so on and so forth under it, so you could sleep up to where the water didn't seep under the shelter half. I might say that at that time is when the malaria became rampant. And we had no hospitals or anything for malaria at that time. You just, if you could find a piece of plywood or a flat board or anything like that, that was your hospital bed. And the Navy corpsmen and the few doctors that we did have went from tent to tent or wherever when you was reported.
Did you get malaria?
Oh yes, I had malaria. I was down with malaria about 3 weeks, I think, at that. And of course I wasn't well or anything, but I reported back for duty. And I would say that 75% or more of our outfit or our unit had malaria at one time or another. But when we came up to New Zealand, we were, like I say, greeted with open arms, and that's where we...
Well, let's not get off Tulagi. Let's cover some more of that. As I heard, it was Tulagi where you living in a swamp or what?
Yes. Yes, all of Tulagi and all of Guadalcanal, besides the hills, were merely swamps. That's tropical country. It rained practically every day, and there was the rainy season. However, we never got to go to Tulagi during the dry season. It rained all the time while we was there, practically.
That's all day and all night?
That's right, all day and all night. It either drizzled or it rained hard.
When did you get rid of the Japanese? Or did you ever get rid of them?
Oh, not completely rid of them. No island was ever, I might say, ever completely rid of the Japanese, because they had a way of hiding more or less like animals. They dug into the ground or went into the caves and some way maintained to be alive, and so...
Did you ever come face to face with any of them?
Why, certainly.
Well,
You're going to ask, well, what did you do?
Yeah, what did you do?
Well, you gave him two chances. You either killed him or he surrendered. It was that simple.
And did you have a few that you surrendered?
Oh yes, not very many. It wasn't the Japanese. You see, the more or less religion, or the Shinto tribe, or as you might call the
religion is the Shinto.
Yes. They thought that anyone surrendered would go to our definition of hell.
Yeah.
So consequently, very few Japanese surrendered. About the only way that you could get a Japanese to surrender was to be sure he had no weapon to kill himself with, or and then he would give up under some circumstances.
In other words, you either kill him or he kills you.
That's right. Now, yes, all during the war, that was the way that we fought. There was, that was put in your mind, and you knew that after the first combat.
Do you ever feel the amazement that somebody didn't get you instead of you getting him?
One of the first things that Al Franczak and I did, the first dead Japanese that we had, we took a bullet off each one of them, or a cartridge, and we put it in our pack, or our shell belt. And we always maintained that that was the bullet that was supposed to get us during World War II. So we carried the bullet that was supposed to get us, and we had confidence in that. I have that bullet at home yet. I wouldn't take anything for it.
Yeah.
But we went to New Zealand. That will get you out of Tulagi, because that was just a small fire. And we trained in New Zealand, trained hard. We established our leaders in New Zealand. That was the main thing. Our higher echelon. Chesty Puller was there. Our commander at that time was Julian Smith. You will find that even my wife's name, today Smith, I was controlled by lots of Smiths all during the service, because we had Howland Mad Smith, who was our general, and Julian Smith, and some others. And I always tease my wife today about that, about her orders, and if she got some of them from the Smiths.
Yeah.
But anyway, we went to New Zealand, and like I say, we were greeted with open arms. We did our training there. And then there was the island of Tarawa. The Japanese had taken this island back in the early part of the war and had begun to build it up to where it was getting to be a threat to Australia and New Zealand. And we were tapped, the 2nd Marine Division, to eliminate the Japanese from the island of Tarawa. That was the biggest battle that I was engaged in.
Oh, show us on the map where Tarawa is.
All right.
You had that big map there.
Yeah.
Was that the book that had the map in it?
Well, I don't know. That's a picture of Tarawa right there.
That other map, I think that other book had a...
It could have.
I don't think...
There was one right there. This is our New Zealand picture here.
Yeah.
This, that's Eleanor Roosevelt. She came to, she said, boost us up in New Zealand.
Uh-huh.
I'll see if we can find a map of Tarawa here. Here's the Guadalcanal campaign. This is the way we dressed. We were not too formal.
Yeah. Who is that right
Bull
there?
Halsey.
Oh, that's Bull Halsey.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's find that map on here.
Well,
We're not doing a very good job of it.
no, we're not.
Well,
Uh, it's back in here somewhere. And
Well, go ahead and tell us about shipping out from New Zealand, and then you go to Tarawa.
well, we shipped out from New Zealand again on one of the line boats, the Matson line boats. And we were transferred then to LSTs. The
Okay.
first of the LSTs were used at, that was in the Pacific, was used on Tarawa. Also, we had another first there, the first Amtraks. In other words, instead of the Higgins boats, we got to get in a steel-lined track boat that actually was a boat and also was a tank. And that's the way we went into Tarawa. I don't think we could have ever got in there if it hadn't been for those, because we did have, were protected by a good steel shield. However, the Japs soon found the answer to that by their mortars. They would arch them and let them come down.
Mm-hmm.
We started into the shore, and our colonel at that time was a Colonel Amy.
Colonel what?
Amy, A-M-E-Y. He was in one of the first boats or Amtraks in towards the shores of Tarawa. Now, Tarawa was not a large island. It was only approximately 10 miles long and a mile wide. But there was around, we always figured there was around 10,000 mad Japs on that island. And it was a flat island. It had only about 10 foot above sea level. Colonel Amy started in with his headquarters aboard an Amtrak, and he caught an arch mortar in. It killed everyone on his Amtrak besides one young man, Sam Jones Billy, a Navajo Indian, was not killed aboard that Amtrak. We landed, we got against the seawall.
Again,
Again, yes, the
those
same.
bamboo logs.
That's right, built just the same. And the Japanese pinned us down with mortars. They were able to fire a mortar up in the air and come down. We lost about 1,500 men the first night that we were inland or landed at.
That would have been 1,500 out of how many?
At that time, out of 2,500.
When you say lost, killed?
Killed, yes. We didn't count a wounded man as a man, because many of the woundeds were walking woundeds and was still doing just as good a job of fighting as the man that was still healthy. I have a picture here in my book that I don't know whether I was lucky or unlucky enough, but our photographer took my picture as I went into Tarawa. I happened to be one of the lucky ones to find a wharf or a place to get into the beach. I found a place with a little protected and got into the beach that way as far as the seawall. And I'll show you later a picture of my way in. Tarawa lasted approximately a week, and we killed every Japanese that was on the island with the exception of 17. And we did take 17 out of the 2,500 or so that was on the island.
You killed all of the Japanese?
That is right. You have to understand this, Bob. The Japanese don't surrender.
Yeah.
And we can, in this book here, I can show you what few Japanese there was that we took in.
What about burial of all these people and that sort of thing?
They were buried always in a common grave.
Uh-huh.
And in other words, the bulldozers came in, opened up a trench, and we throwed them in. Sprayed a little insect repellent and so on and so forth, and covered them up. And covered them with lime, yes.
Well,
that's the way our boys was buried the same way.
they were.
Yes.
In
We
the
later took them out, but nobody to this day knew who was inside that casket that had a name on it.
Didn't they? What about your dog tags? Didn't they have dog tags?
Yes, you had dog tags, and some of them was saved, and some of them was not. Mostly, that particular part of a battle was taken care of by the Navy corpsmen. See, we had no medical men in our service besides some doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And we had stretcher bearers and so on and so forth, but our medics, who I will say now were the bravest men in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
They were Navy corpsmen. And without question, they went to a wounded man.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the privilege of knowing quite a number of them.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, we finished Tarawa. We got the Presidential Unit Citation for that. We had quite a number of Medals of Honor issued there. In fact, we have a man, or did have a man, he's passed away now, that few people in this area, I'm sorry to say, knew of. Bob, and
Who?
I'm going to tell you in a little bit.
Okay.
I've been sorry all my life that he was not brought to the forefront and given the honors that he deserved. His name was, I call him Colonel Shoup from West Lafayette, Indiana. He was a Medal of Honor winner. He was a resident of Covington when he went into the service. He later came back from the service and spent his days after retirement in West Lafayette, Indiana. And he was not given the credit that I think that we Hoosiers should have given him. A Medal of Honor, man, you probably never heard that he lived.
Never have, no.
But they're beginning to write stories about him now. From Tarawa, we were sent back to Hawaii. It was a very sorry mission that we started back because we hadn't told all of the wonderful people in New Zealand how we appreciated them taking care of us over there. And many of the young men in our outfit later went back to New Zealand and married the girlfriends that they had established there. to this day, we still have a few old-timers that are in New Zealand. They come to our get-togethers practically every time we have a reunion, them and their wives. We went from there back to the Parker Ranch in Hawaii, our training camp that we had been in before. And we did not train as hard there because we was already counted as seasoned veterans. So life in Hawaii was mighty fine.
Live in a hotel?
Huh?
Did you live in a hotel?
No, we didn't live in a hotel, but we lived in Quonset huts, which kept the rain out of us. And we also had liberty every weekend in Hilo or someplace in the area of Hawaii, the Big Island. And I might say that life was well spent. Mm-hmm. Then our training began to become serious, and we knew we were going someplace, but we didn't have any idea where it would be. We were sent out. This was in 1944 at that time. We were sent to the islands, the Marianas Islands. We didn't know where we were going, but we were sent to the island of Saipan. We needed it for an airport. The Japs had already established Osalita Airport and on Saipan, another airport, a tremendous big airport on Tinian, which was a neighbor island only 3 miles from Saipan. We landed on Saipan in about the 1st of June.
Riding on the Matson line again, or how'd you get there?
No, that time we didn't. We went on LSTs.
Okay.
And combat ships. The Japs had the island well fortified, but it was a larger, considerably larger island. So we started playing hide and go seek with them. That is, we would land where they wasn't expecting us. So we landed at the city of Garapan on Saipan.
What was the name of that?
Garapan. Garapan.
Okay.
It was a big sugar cane manufacturing city. There was a lot of sugar cane grinding places there, and that island was occupied by people called Chamarans. They were of Spanish descent, and they had owned or taken care of the island and lived in the island for probably as much as 100 years before that. Mm-hmm. And our worst problem with them was that they looked identically like the Japanese. Consequently, I may not have to tell you that we killed a lot of Chamarans that was friendly to us, because you didn't have time to stop and ask questions as to. And the Japanese had already mistreated them so terribly that they had no confidence in human atoll. Well, we took the Isolito Airport first because that was what we was wanting and what was the purpose of taking the island was to get an airport there so we could begin to cover our shipping lanes and so on and so forth with more planes because the Japanese were playing havoc with our shipping out in that area. But we succeeded in taking that, and we had at that time what was probably excuse me, the most heartrending experience that I had in the service. The north end of Saipan Island was formed by a cliff that was approximately 500 to 600, maybe 700 feet tall, almost straight up and down with rock cliffs. And in our invasion, the plans was that the two divisions of Marine Corps and the one division of Army would drive the Japanese back towards this cliff. And that is what we succeeded in doing after about 30 days. And the worst part was that we had ahead of us most of the Shamarans too, the original occupants of the island. Well, rather than surrender, those people jumped off, and we were witnesses to it, all jumped off of the cliff. The Japanese would not surrender. The Shamarans were just literally so confused and so scared that they proceeded to jump off the cliff too. So actually, almost half of our Japanese that was killed on the island we found at the bottom of the cliff. That was where Life magazine, I must go back just a little bit here to tell this story. We were not allowed cameras. Anybody that was caught in the Marine Corps, with the exception of the official photographers, which were pointed out as Marines, anybody that was caught with a camera was immediately given a general court-martial. So we had no way of taking pictures. But our official photographer, there was one in each battalion, he took the pictures. But anyway, some way there was a camera that was brought to in by the Japanese, or by the Marine Corps. Some serviceman had a camera. Well, he took a picture of the carnage and so on and so forth. He took quite a number of pictures of those that was left after the people had jumped off the island, or jumped off the cliff at the north end of the island. And Life magazine got a hold of that photograph some way. Now, if I'm not mistaken...
You saw all this? You saw that happen?
Well, sure I saw that happen.
Right before your eyes?
Well, not all of it, because we had different things we had to do, but I saw them jumping off the island, and so on and so on. I think maybe...
I think I had heard, of course, of that. Of that incident.
Well, I thought I had a picture here of it, but...
Did they make any attempt to bury those people that were
They were buried. In fact, they were all picked up and buried in a common grave.
About how many of them would have been?
Well, my guess would have been 5,000.
5,000
Yes.
people jumped off that cliff.
Yes. I don't know. I don't know as I ever saw a guesstimated figure of it, but I would guess somewhere that. The interesting thing about it was this. After about 2 months, we found that on the island of Saipan, that we had bypassed quite a number of Japanese and in the caves and so on and so forth, where they had hid in the caves. Well, they made the decision, and they were doing a lot of damage to the airplanes and the air strip down at Osalito. Well, we decided that we would take another island sweep. In other words, form our battle lines and go across the island again, examine each cave or each place where any Japanese could be hiding. That was about 3 months after we secured the island. We did that, and surprisingly, we headed again towards the north cliff. That was to be the final place. And surprisingly, we flushed out approximately, they said, 750 Japanese, and they again, most of them jumped off the cliff. And that way, we did eliminate most of the Japs from the island. Now, we had not a funny experience. It was kind of comical. Our mess hall that we set up after we took the island of Saipan, we set it up close to Mount Tapashaw, the bottom of Mount Tapashaw. And it got to the big place where every morning, about from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock, a Japanese sniper up in the on Mount Tapashaw would shoot a hole through that cook shack. Consequently, our cooks got so shell-shocked and nervous we hardly had breakfast every morning because they could plan on at least one shot going through that metal roof where they was trying to get breakfast about 3 o'clock in the morning. But we took care of that when we made the island sweep, and again.
Well, about flushing these people out of the caves, how'd you do that?
Flamethrowers. That was the greatest. See, Saipan is where the flamethrower first came into use. And all you had to do was just squirt that in a cave and it burned up all the oxygen. And as a general rule, the Japanese that was in there had to come out because he couldn't breathe. But he got burned too.
But some of them come out alive?
Oh yeah, they'd come out alive. We took them as prisoners.
They didn't commit hara-kiri.
They couldn't walk. They were burned too bad. But we did.
For instance, you got a Japanese that's burned like that. Did you try to give them medical attention?
Yes, we gave them the very best medical attention that we could have. And some of those, a very few of those, the most intelligent of the Japs, came to be informers. Not necessarily as really informers as to what the Japanese military would do, but as to their habits, their established habits, and they helped us a lot. But right now becomes my interesting part of the service to me.
Okay.
At that time, why, and to this day I do not know, we had established the Navajo Code Talkers. You may have heard of them. That is when we literally snowed the Japanese as far as our intelligence reports, our radio reports, all of our reports that we sent out by wire, by radio, or any other way. The Japanese read them, stole them some way. But at that time, a man in the Marine Corps had made, I don't know his name, I can't remember it now. He had mentioned that the Navajos had a language that only approximately 10 white men could understand, and nobody else. Well, he suggested that we get the Navajos, young men who could speak their language fluently, and we would distribute them throughout the Marine Corps in each unit, and they would put out the information in the Navajo language, and there would be a Navajo at the other end that knew what they were talking about. It happened to fall my duty, as I was one of the older men in the Marine Corps at that time, age-wise, that I take over in kind of schooling of these Navajos that were sent to us. Now, mind you, there were not a lot of them, but each man was in a younger age. They came mostly from Arizona and Nevada. And some way I got pointed out to kind of take care of them. Well, time passed on, and some way I just acquired the Navajos in my regiment. And I was taken over as their leader and caretaker, because mostly it was caretaker. Now, the Navajo men, they had no fear. They were probably some of the most devoted people in the United States service. They had one habit: if there was any alcohol or anything that pertained to alcohol on the island, in the air, or any place, they managed to find it. And they didn't come home until they drank it all. My dearest friend, Sam Jones Billy, who was at that time, he was a top sergeant in the Navajo unit that was with us. He got drunk one night and spent all night out without leave. When he came in that morning, it looked like he had been just cut up and everything, and we thought that the Navy had gotten a fight with him. Well, we decided that we would go down and take care of the Navy. And just about that time, Sam Jones came to enough, and we asked him, says, who did you get in a fight with? He didn't get in a fight with anybody. He got lost coming home, went through the cane fields, and the edge of the cane, wherever it touches you, cuts a strip if you're, and he was cut up, but we didn't have to go take care of the Navy.
How many Navajos did you have under your care?
I had 32 under my care, which was practically all that was in the 2nd Marine Regiment.
Were you a sergeant by this time?
That time I was a sergeant, yes.
Okay.
And, but they were wonderful boys. But here's the thing that has always made me sorry. They were not naturalized Americans or United States citizens. They were under the care of the citizens because they all came off the Navajo reservation. And I've got to see many of them since then. Some of them got in awful bad shape. They got using alcohol so bad, and some of them were killed in city brawls and so on and so forth. But even them, I have a big soft place in my heart for the Navajo. After Saipan, and a short time after that, we assembled again, and with the 4th Marine Division, we took Tinian, which was one of the most perfect island battles that we counted in the South Pacific. The airmen that were on Tinian were not necessarily frontline fighters mostly. Excuse me. And consequently, they did not put up too much of a fight in trying to protect it. And the island of Saipan had been occupied for about 2 months, and it being only 3 miles apart, why they accepted the fact. In fact, more Japanese prisoners were taken on the island of Tinian than all the rest of the island.
In other words, they kind of gave up.
They had gave up, yes.
For the Japanese, they were communicating with the homeland, so they knew what was.
They knew what was going on. Yes.
They knew that they were pretty well
nationally or internationally, I would say.
Was the war in Germany still going on?
Oh yes, yes. The invasion of Germany was what, June the 4th of 1944.
44.
I think June the 4th, if I remember right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, the fighting in Germany, we would get our reports from it and so on and so forth. And we were encouraged by the fighting in Germany just as much as anybody else was, because we could see that there might be an end to that thing before too long. Well, from Saipan, we set up more or less our rest camp there, the 2nd Marine, and we assisted with the guarding of Sausalito Airport, which later became one of the top airports for the B-29s. Also, the big airport at Tinian was one of the B-29. We all had heard the rumor of this enormous airplane that was going to come in and occupy our airports there. Well, the scuttlebutt got that it was just be an enormous airplane that could carry 100 tons of supplies and so on, and you can imagine some of the stories about it. But lo and behold, in about a month after that, the first B-29 arrived in Sausalito Airport at Saipan, and it was exactly what we were looking for, and maybe even more. It was the biggest thing that we had ever saw, and we couldn't figure out how they was going to load bombs aboard that thing and get it up in the air again. But they did. Consequently, we being right close there, we began to trade things and so on and so forth with the pilots. They became our suckers. They was wild for Japanese pieces of war, Japanese money, anything that was owned or had been held by the Japanese, you could just trade a B-29 pilot or the airport personnel something ridiculous. And I will tell you this, that the Marine Corps became very good traders. I might show you here what was one of the best, because the pilots had a thing when they went to the bar they called short snorter notes.
What?
Short snorter notes. Notes. What they were, if you had a bigger note, a bill, originally it was a $20 bill or a $50 bill or so on. But when they came to the South Pacific, it began to be pieces of Japanese money. Consequently, the Marines being the first place to get a hold of this money, these are troop tickets and stuff. I'll find you some Japanese money here. Here we go. These were short snorter notes. You could take that, there's a $50 yen, or 50 yen note. These are all 50 yen notes. And so on. These, I got off of Tinian. We happened to be one of the outfits that went into Tinian town, and we robbed the bank.
You robbed the bank, wasn't you?
Yes. Well, we took all the money out of the bank, because you see, if a B-29 pilot or any group or any man could show a bigger Japanese note than all the rest of the fellows at the bar, he didn't have to buy a drink that night. They all bought him drinks. That's the reason why they call them short snorter notes. And each Marine, as a general rule, was always equipped with, this is my pocketbook that I carried all during the service. And these are meal tickets aboard ships that you couldn't go back 3 times. They punched your meal ticket each time you went through, as you could see. You couldn't get back in line to get the second egg or the second baked bean.
You mean, well, when I remember being in the service, you could eat all you wanted. You could eat all you wanted, but you didn't want that much.
Oh, mercy. We
Well,
went through that line twice a day, and it was punched each time. As you could see, there was a swabby standing right there in front and punched that meal ticket. And you had your rank, your name, and everything else on it.
Norm, I can remember being on board that ship, and you'd get on. You'd get in line, and by the time you got through with the line, you'd go back at the end of the line, start over.
I remember a few people that tried that in our outfit. You know what they do? They pick them up, and they'd pass them all up and down the chow line overhead, and they'd be kicking and screaming and everything. But no, you didn't go through the chow line 2 times. We didn't have that much to eat.
I always heard that the Navy and the Marines had more to eat than we had, and they ate better.
That must have been in the United States, because we didn't.
But
then
well,
we got one more.
what you use of course you were getting money. Were you did you have any use for money?
For United States money?
Yeah.
Only to play poker with.
Yeah.
And that was practically all that was used for. And most of the Marine Corps had their money sent
Home.
to home.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I had practically all of my money sent home.
Sent to your parents?
Later, I remember I was married when I first went in the Marine Corps.
That.
I had it sent to my then wife, and up until I got my Dear John letter.
Uh-huh.
You know what that is.
Yeah.
And so after that, I sent it home, had it transferred, and sent home to my parents.
Oh.
And we went from there on one of our trips that to this day I have never figured out just how it was planned and so on as far as the operation of it. That was our fake trip to the island of Okinawa. The Japanese, their home island of Okinawa was the first island. Now mind you, this was after Iwo Jima. And, I was not in Iwo Jima, thank goodness. The plans were that the Army and the Marine Corps combined would take over and capture the island of Okinawa. And we were sent up there and knew at the time that we were not going to land. We would not be in the assault or the battle of Okinawa. That is, I'm speaking now of the 2nd Marine Regiment. But we did fake 2 different landings. And by doing that, I guessed that the plans that we thought were so fouled up was actually the perfect plan. Most of the combat units of the Japanese Army that was stationed on the island of Okinawa saw us, and they sent their planes, and that was where the kamikaze planes did hit us pretty hard. But we performed this fake. We actually got clear down into the landing equipment and started towards the beach. But then we turned around and came back and loaded aboard ship again.
Mm-hmm.
And the 8th Marines and so on and so forth, they were on the other side of the island and slipped in after dark, got in and assaulted Okinawa. The 27th Army Division, I forget all the units, there was quite a number of units involved, and they made a very successful landing at practically no life lost at all on the landing, and was able to take Okinawa in a few short weeks. We, in turn, sailed back to Saipan, unloaded, and shook hands with ourselves. And we hadn't had a shot fired at us, only kamikaze planes.
Norm, tell it. We left that thing about the big plane. What was that big plane you were talking about?
That was the B-29.
Yeah.
And it was the one that would, sooner or later, win the war for us.
Yeah.
Because they were actually the ones that caused the Japanese to surrender.
That was
Them
the
and
one
the atomic bomb.
That the atomic bomb was, of course, that was not the particular plane.
No.
That was not the Enola Gay.
Well, I stood and watched the Enola Gay and all, and
You saw that?
yes, I thought so. The Enola Gay was there sometime before that. All of the B-29s had names and beautiful pictures painted on the side of them, and so on.
Well, now,
We all,
when did you see the Enola Gay?
the Enola Gay I saw in Tinian at probably 2 weeks before the atomic bomb was brought in there. You see, there was, truthfully, there was a rumor that this atomic bomb existed. We didn't know anything about it. No one knew anything about it. And I'm speaking now of pretty high up people in the service. That was kept awfully quiet. But the story got out that we had a bomb that would eliminate half of a state or something like that. Now, we couldn't believe it. Nobody believed the thing. But anyhow, the rumors got out. And if you've been in the service, you know that how rumors get spread. And shortly after the rumor came out, and we had been on Saipan for quite some time at that time, the big B-29s began to, at that time, fly clear to Japan from Tinian and Saipan. And they also, after Iwo Jima was secured, they used Iwo Jima as more or less an emergency field when they got shot up in Japan or one of the islands there. They would fly back to Iwo Jima, and Iwo Jima had a good enough field that they could land for repairs and so on. However, the B-29s did not fly out of Iwo Jima too much, that is, as far as an assembled base. But anyhow, we, like I say, we had heard the rumor of the atomic bomb. Well, we started at that time watching the B-29s come in and do their maneuvering and so on and so forth, and they were bombing Japan every night practically, flying from the islands of Tinian and Saipan up to the island of Japan and so on, and scoring a lot of hits and doing a lot of damage. Well, then all of a sudden we started making preparations to get aboard ship and to ship out. And it was kind of a question to all of us. Even at that time, I was far enough that I could ask a major or something what's going on. And they were just as perplexed as we was about it. Anyway, we boarded ship after the rumors had got pretty high about the atomic bomb, about this. It wasn't called an atomic bomb or anything. Of course, it was just called this strong bomb that they had. And when we got about 2 days out of Saipan, headed for, we didn't have any idea where, the first atomic bomb hit Hiroshima. And of course we heard the reports. Nobody could believe it, the damage that it had done, and so on. And our ships actually slowed down by orders. We knew they wasn't running that fast, and sometimes we would even circle in a rendezvous. And the next thing we heard was that Nagasaki had had the second atomic bomb on it. Well then, after the second atomic bomb, our ships went full speed ahead. We headed for Nagasaki. We did not know where we were going. Nobody knew where we were going. we arrived in the Nagasaki harbor, we found nothing but steel girders. There was no buildings, just steel girders of buildings, cement blocks scattered every place, and they told us that the second atomic bomb had just hit Nagasaki. Well,
did you get off the ship?
I can give you a little story there. A Marine gets off the ship if he wants to. He jumps ship. Yes, we got off the ship. We went to look to see what the second atomic bomb had done. I don't know. I got a cancer operation here now. I'm not sure where. I might have got it there.
Yeah,
I don't know.
probably had something to do with it.
Ah, no, I don't think so. But anyway, we were sent in as troops to establish some kind of a peace or what we did not know, and take care of the island of that was let's see, I get those islands mixed up. Anyway, I can't remember the name of that island, Honshu, I think, or something. But we established a camp there just outside of Nagasaki, what was left of Nagasaki. Our first operation that we formed up on the mountains, the side, there was a group of Catholic people who had established a children's unit there, and they had been hit awful hard. Well, we went up and helped take care of them, some of the nuns and the priests that were there that were taking care of Japanese children.
These were Americans or who were
These were from Americans, yes, that was there and had been there during the operation and the atomic bomb. They saw the atomic bomb, and we learned our first information about
These are Americans who lived in Japan.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And shortly after that, we began to establish connections with the Japanese. The first thing we did was to hire them. What was left of the Japanese, we hired to unload our ships and supplies that we had brought in there in Nagasaki. Those fellas worked like bees. They just worked because we were giving them food and paying them more or less with food, which is what they wanted. We established our camp, and again I go back to my old friend Al Fronstack. He and I were again together in that camp. At that time, we both held the rank of sergeant majors, and so consequently we pretty well had our own way. But our first leave, we decided that we would go down and look again, just look over Nagasaki and see just for our own minds what would happen. Well, we started. We got as far as where we headed down the mountain. We were walking at that time, and we didn't have very many jeeps, or we'd have had one. But we were walking at that time, and we found a big buck Japanese man, and he had his wife or his mother in front of him, carrying a telephone pole strapped onto her back. You see, the Japanese man doesn't know manual labor in Japan. The Japanese women done that mostly. I'm talking about manual labor. But
a telephone pole.
Yes, a telephone pole, approximately 20 feet long, and I would say 5 inches in diameter or more. they were carrying it home for wood. You got to remember this, that the Japanese were completely destitute at that time around there.
Oh.
Well, the big Pollock and I, we just couldn't stand seeing that woman. She was all bent over, but she was getting up the mountain or up the road with the telephone pole, and he was walking beside her. We decided that we'd make him carry the telephone pole up the mountain, which we did. It took a lot. No Missouri mule was ever any more contrarian than that guy was, but he carried that pole up the mountain. So that's the way I spent my first leave in Nagasaki, Japan. We stayed there until for almost 6 months, and tried to do our best to establish the population around Nagasaki. The Japanese turned in to be some of the finest people you ever met. You would think that after fighting them that long, you never could get it out, but I still have Japanese friends that I communicate with. And we shipped out of Sasebo, Japan, to come home after the war was over. In fact, we found out that the European war was over when we was going to Okinawa. And of course, then the Japanese surrendered, and it was the whole thing was over. But of course, we were there about 6 months after the Declaration of Peace. And then we shipped into San Diego. We were sent from there to Chicago to the Navy Pier up there, and that's where we were discharged.
Did you, with all that, were you around when MacArthur signed the peace treaty?
Don't mention MacArthur too loud in the presence of a Marine. I say that with all fairness to MacArthur. But MacArthur did not handle, in my opinion, the Pacific War as well as he led people to believe he did. If you want to look at a Pacific War hero, you look at Bull Halsey, you look at Howland Mad Smith, you look at Julian Smith, you look at Vandegrift, and different ones of them. Even the boys that took back the Philippines, that MacArthur stayed in Australia and directed. You see, they spent...
You must be an admirer of Harry Truman.
I am. I thought Harry Truman done a good job. He took over while we were still in the service, and I think that Harry saw the full side of MacArthur.
Yeah.
That he and his corncob pipe and so on didn't do near as much of winning the war as he thought he did.
Okay. Let's
we'd better
tell about what happened after the war, Norm. What did you do after the war?
After the war, I had the greatest father in the world, and he already had me an implement business built in Crawfordsville.
Gary and his wife used to sit near us in the Presbyterian church.
You bet they did.
Yeah, they gave that fountain down there.
That's right.
Baptismal fountain.
Yeah, he also gave the organ.
Yeah.
And yes, my father was a great man to me and my brother Bob, because he just kind of...
What other family did you have?
I had one brother and two sisters. We were all very much involved with World War II. My one sister her husband was killed while he was in the service, not in combat, but he was killed in an automobile wreck, but he was a lieutenant in the Navy.
What about your brother?
My brother served about 5 years in the service too.
What was his name?
Bob, Robert. He was in the Navy. He and I never got quite squared away as to who won the war.
Now, what about your marriage? What who you married to? And
I was married, like I say, and when I went into the service, a bad marriage. We'll not talk anymore about that. Then I met an old girlfriend of mine that I had known before I went into the service from Lebanon. And she and I were married and spent 25 years of good life here in Crawfordsville, and she died of a very sudden heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
And then
what was her name?
Mary Fern Cleaver, Dillman. Mary Fern Dillman, or Mary Fern Cleaver before she was married. And then I lost her, and Ruby had lost her husband, and we were old schoolmates, and I wrote Ruby a note because I was afraid to call her on the telephone because I knew she could turn me down on the telephone right quick. But I wrote her a note so she couldn't turn me down on the telephone, Bob, and she and I kind of got together.
Okay.
And we decided later, after having a good time with each other for a while, that we ought to just sign a contract.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been the love of my life and probably is the greatest woman in Crawfordsville.
Now, who is your, you mentioned an adopted daughter. Who was that? You mentioned that you adopted
I adopted a son.
A son?
Yes, he lives here. He's in this town yet. Malcolm Curtis Dillman.
Okay.
We adopted him when Fern Cleaver and I had been married 2 years, and we adopted him. I never knew for a long time who his parents was, and I do know now, but I wouldn't put that out for any words or anything.
Well, and you've been, how long have you been retired now?
I retired in 1964. I got to stay retired for one weekend. And then Leonard McDaniel and his right-hand man, George Lamson, came to see me, and they told me that their old shop foreman, Joe Rice, was going to have to retire due to his health. And would I come and start taking over as their shop foreman and maintenance foreman of the freight lines? Well, I did. And I had about 8 years of my most enjoyable part of life. I worked for McDaniels. McDaniels later sold out to the McCormick brothers of Vincennes. They immediately told me, "You're our shop foreman." And I took over shops in Chicago, St. Louis, Indianapolis,
Uh-huh.
and our Crawfordsville shop, and a Terre Haute shop, and Danville, Illinois shop.
You supervised all those?
I was either aboard an airplane, going to get an airplane, or driving from one garage and shop, we call it, another, and at that time, I was getting about 60 years old. Well, Bob, I tell you, I was just wore out, but them guys wouldn't let me go. They done everything. They were the nicest employers that I ever could believe. They'd come here with a private plane and pick me up and so on, but still, I wasn't getting any sleep. I either had a wreck in Chicago or St. Louis that I had to see about, or something. But I finally got retired from them.
How long ago did you retire?
From
How long you been out of it?
I've been out since the INS McDaniels was bought out, and I worked for them until 1970. And then I decided that it was time I toast my heels. And then I lost my wife in 72, and Ruby and I were married in 73.
Now, where do you live now?
I live in an apartment in Green Acres, out east of town on 32, and we've completely retired, and I don't even have to mow the lawn.
Now you mentioned you go to reunions. When's the last reunion you went to?
The last reunion that I went to was in we have them every 2 years. The last I missed the reunion 2 years ago, but other than that, I had attended every one of them. So the last one that I attended was in 1995, and it was in Rapid City, South Dakota.
Now you mentioned this friend of yours, you keep in touch with him all the time.
Al Fronczak?
Yeah.
Yes, he's still there, and he's completely retired, and he and his wife are still live in a suburb of Milwaukee.
Okay, I think we're about finished.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful. That's been a great story, Norm. Thanks for coming.
Well, it's the first time I ever told the whole story. And I do want to give you this book